All right, Commissioner, you may now begin.
Good morning, everyone. This is the September 24 meeting of the Development and Finance Committee of the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County. Present with us this morning are committee members Rick Nelson, Jeffrey Merkowitz, and myself as chair. And we have numerous staff available to assist and make their recommendations. The first item of business is the approval of our August 20 minutes. Do I have a motion to approve as circulated?
So moved.
A second, please.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The minutes are unanimously approved. The first item on our agenda is the Georgian court approval of the financing plan, feasibility and public purpose, authorization to issue loans for acquisition, construction, authorization, and authorization for the borrower to accept loans and to issue a commitment for permanent financing. Karine, I believe Jennifer's going to introduce this.
Yes.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jennifer
Good
Arrington.
morning.
For the record, my name is Jennifer Arrington, Acting Director of Mortgage Finance, and Victoria Dixon will be presenting this item today. Let me go ahead, Victoria. You're on mute.
Hello, good morning. My name again is Victoria Dixon, requesting approval of the financing plan for Georgian Court. If you'll go to the next slide, Georgian Court is an existing is an existing 147 unit income restricted community in Silver Spring, Maryland. The property was originally constructed in 1975 and renovated in 2001 using LIHTC equity. On September 1st, the Commission approved the final development plan to acquire, renovate, and equip the property with improvements to energy efficiency, common areas, building exteriors, and in-unit upgrades of finishes and appliance in bathrooms and kitchens. In order to execute the development plan with the support of the Development and Finance Committee, we would like to recommend approval of the following actions to the Commission for this transaction. If you'll go to slides 13. The approval of the financing plan as presented, totaling approximately $73.8 million. Approval of the feasibility and public purpose and the allocation of up to $29.3 million in volume cap for the transaction. Approval of the bond authorizing resolution in an amount of $30.05 million for issuance and delivery of both tax-exempt private activity and taxable bonds under the 1996 indenture. Authorization to issue a financing commitment for the mortgage loan with a balloon payment option, which will be credit enhanced by FHA risk share mortgage insurance, and HOC would assume 25% of the risk. Approval for the net sales proceeds due to the seller of approximately $9.2 million to be funded to the OHRF on an unrestricted basis. Approval for HOC to provide a bridge loan of approximately $3.5 million to the borrower during construction to bridge the receipt of like equity, which would use proceeds funded from the OHRF. Approval to release available cash held by the seller entity, proceeds held in the replacement reserve to repay the relock with remaining funds deposited to the OHRF, and cash held in the operating cash and mortgage escrow accounts to be deposited to the HOC's general fund operating reserve, and finally for the borrower to accept the proposed loans. If you would move to through the next few slides. A review of the transaction has been completed and determined to meet the needs of the community to preserve affordable housing, provide significant public purpose, and support the allocation of available volume cap for the 4% tax credits. The property is currently operating under an extended use covenant, which is set to expire on December 31st, 2030. With the proposed transaction, income restrictions for all units will be preserved an additional 21 years in furtherance of HOC's mission, with 29% set aside for households earning at or below 50% of AMI, which are also benefiting from project-based Section 8 rental assistance, and the remaining 118 units set aside for those at or below 60% of AMI. If you would go 2 more slides. In addition, given the financial commitments of the properties and its operating projections, this transaction is considered feasible as post-renovation stabilized operations are expected to be achieved by April 2023 and assumes an NOI of approximately $1 million. Based on an all-in interest rate of 3.67%, including a 50 basis point cushion for interest rate movements, the property is projected to support a loan of approximately $17.3 million. Exclusion of the cushion, the transaction supports a mortgage amount of approximately $18.5 million. The next slide.
Before we leave that slide, I have a question on how the relationship of the rents when returning are being increased 5%. How does that conform to the voluntary rent guidelines? And does the fact that it's being redeveloped allow that if the voluntary rent guidelines were less, because we have committed to trying to conform to the voluntary rent guidelines?
So the 5% increase would be higher than the voluntary rent guidelines, but we will not be increasing for those existing tenants. It would be only if they were to sign new leases for the new units.
Well,
but the answer
I think
is
we
yes.
approved. I think we approved those rent
Right.
increases
In
last
this month.
month.
Yeah, that's
I-
But
correct.
Jackie,
Yes.
the answer is yes. The voluntary rent guidelines allow higher than VRG when you are renovating a property and they're going into a new unit.
that's, I just wanted to be sure and
Yeah.
fully understand that. Thank you.
Mhm.
While we stop, I have a question. How long is construction supposed to?
2 years.
I mean, I see by the chart up there, it says finished construction by November, but you're gonna have stabilized in April of 23. How's that possible?
I can't move that. Can
The chart on page 15 or slide 7 says that renovations complete November 23. And
Oh.
down here on page 18, it says you're gonna.
sorry, that's a typo. Sorry.
Okay, what's the typo?
So it should be 2024 by April 2024. Then
Okay,
we certainly expect it sooner.
okay. I mean, I understand that. I mean, it should be, but
Sorry.
April was just, anyway, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
On the next slide, we have an outline of the sources and uses for the transaction. And then if you would please move forward through the slides, we have a representation of our volume cap allocation for the year, the summary of the bond authorizing resolution prepared by council.
Can we go back to that slide for just a moment? And I don't really have a question. The chart on the left is pretty clear. I found the bullet points a little confusing, that you might want to consider some edits here for the full commission. Just say, that at the start, it says annual volume cap 13.1 million. We received 40.6 million. And then we jump ahead and it says we've got 101.3. And that becomes clear, either looking at the chart or seeing down below that it's, we added 60, we got a special allocation, but it was a little confusing to me when I first read it. So that's all.
All right, make a note of that.
And related to the whole issue, how and when are we going to make up the shortfall?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Rick, because that was my actual other question, because it says, yeah, they're going to give us, they're considering advancing us 5 million, but we've got a shortfall of 13.
No.
The
Yeah,
shortfall for
4.1
22, I'm sorry, the shortfall for 2021 is the 4.1 million. We've requested 5. And so as we're presenting these transactions for financing, we'll request it and they will provide it from this year's volume cap that's available, and then reduce the amount of next year's by the 5 million or 4.1 million. So we will have it for this year for the financing.
I'm not sure I understood that. Are you saying as we get to each project, we will
Yes.
make separate requests?
We've requested it already. We sent a letter requesting it. And so when we file the paperwork with the state, the volume cap will be provided to us.
So there's a request for 5 million for this
Yeah.
project, and then there will be
There's a
requests.
request for 5 million, period. And so when we get to the last transaction, however much is needed, which will be the 4.1 that we're showing here, it will be provided.
And the last project is what, either Sewer Town? We did.
It'll be
Shady
so,
Grove.
so Shady Grove and Georgian Court are expected to close at around the same time. So whichever is the last one will be allocated to that project. We'll file a certificate, and the volume cap will be allocated to that transaction.
So then technically, and
This chart is really just showing the universe of
no, I
need.
understand that. I'm just saying that technically, when we approve the financing plan,
Mhm.
it will be subject to receipt of 5 million additional
Yes,
volume cap.
yes, up to
And
5
I'm not
million.
sure that's clear in the resolution. It should be.
And is it
I mean,
assured
I'm not
that?
questioning. I'm not questioning that we're going to get it. I mean,
Mhm.
Okay,
because CDA is always true to their word.
No, we've had a discussion with them. It isn't just a letter that we've sent. We've had a discussion with them. They understand that earlier in the year, most of our numbers were estimates, and they see no issues with allocating it. So,
But I still say, to be technically correct,
mhm.
we have to state in our approval that it is subject to receipt of the additional monies for volume cap.
Okay.
And I guess the other question I have is, since you're saying that the 5 million will come off of next year's allocation, have we begun conversations and/or developed figures for what we think we'll need next year?
We have a chart that's also in here, Jennifer, or it's in yeah, we have started to build those numbers.
Yeah.
And you may recall the former executive director and staff have worked with the secretary of housing to ensure that going forward, HOC and other jurisdictions, we have a pathway to request volume cap that we need for our transactions. And it's really just presenting, as we have in the past, our needs at the beginning of the year and begin that discussion for a special allocation similar to this year's request. So we'll be going through that process. But we do have a chart that we're building out with the needs for next year.
But
Yeah.
I guess, and I'm not clear the process and the schedule
Mhm.
for that. I mean, I understand we've had these conversations and all this stuff has gone on,
Yeah.
But there comes a point when we have to ask and they have to say yes.
Mhm.
And I don't know where that is. And I'm always skeptical until I see the yes.
Sure.
We've had promises before. I also wonder how that affects or is affected by their budgeting for the following year in terms of timing, because I assume they're putting together budgets for FY23 and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
I think it would be useful just to understand what that timeline is in terms of the volume cap.
Sure. We can
I-
provide you
I
with
also,
our list and talk further on this.
Okay.
Corinne, I'm confused by the final bullet on this sentence. The prior year unused volume cap can only be carried forward, that's carried forward can only be used by CDA. Can it be
Sure.
used to grant to HOC?
So only the state can carry forward unused cap, and so only they can use it. So there is an arrangement between us and CDA whereby any unused cap by HOC is carried forward by them. And then from the next year's new cap, they give it back to us. So they'll use our unused cap next year, but they give it back to us from fresh 2022 cap if there's any unused volume cap of ours that they carry forward on our behalf.
That 13.1 million that we carried over
Mhm.
was technically
Ours
granted to us. It was ours, but then taken back by CDA and then given back to us.
from fresh 2021 cap. Yes.
Got it.
Okay. So moving forward through the slides, let's go to slide 23. Based on current underwriting, staff projects income collection for the transaction will be lower than budgeted for the agency's fiscal year due to incorporation of a deferred developer fee in order to realize higher LIHTC equity. And if you would move to the next slide. The final, in order to execute the development plan as presented, staff proposes the following financing plan, including the issuance of tax-exempt private activity bonds and taxable bonds up to $30,050,000, which will fund a 38-year FHA risk share mortgage with a balloon payment option and bond reserve under the indenture. HOC to share in 25% of the risk of the transaction, allocated up to 29.3 million of HOC's available tax-exempt volume cap to satisfy the LIHTC 50% test. HOC to provide a bridge loan using seller proceeds through the OHRF with the additional transaction sources of LIHTC equity, deferred developer fee, and subordinate seller loan, and available property cash held in the residual receipts account.
Can I ask a question on the prior slide? The 500 or the 347,000 shortfall.
Mhm.
How are we accommodating that in the budget?
Commissioner Nelson, this is Terry Fowler.
Yep.
Many times the development and commitment fees change during the budget due to timing or sizing of the debt.
Yes.
This isn't something that is uncommon, and we monitor that through the year to look at where we may have lost fees, where we may have gained fees, and where we have other savings and or extra income in the budget. But it's something we will monitor through the year.
But we also have reserves that can cover this, correct?
Yes, if there's no other source, we do have operating reserves if we end up with an overall shortfall.
And I think my point is, and I did understand all of that, but shouldn't we be clear in this material that even though it's a $347,000 shortfall, there are provisions in the budget to accommodate that shortfall? I mean, it's not like we're just deficit financing.
A statement could be added.
I mean, that's my point. I think
Yes.
for those who might not be overly familiar with the process that we use and all the adjustments you make during the year and the reserves, we have a way to accommodate that $347,000 shortfall.
The budget office can work with Victoria to add language before the commission meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And it looks like, if I understand it correctly, so, you know, that shortfall is happening because we're deferring the developer fee, or we've incorporated a deferred developer fee, and then we're getting higher equity amounts because of that. So it's, I don't know the extent to which that's sort of covering that same amount or paying for itself, or, you know, but there's some value there, right?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I'm not questioning the efficacy of the shortfall, because I think the deferred developer fee is something we do frequently. But it's just that for accounting purposes, it seems we ought to indicate that we have a way to cover it.
Terry, if you'll assist in
Yes,
getting
I'll work
that
with
language
Victoria and we'll
changed,
get
we'd
language
appreciate
added
it.
to the packet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions of the staff regarding Georgian Court? If not, may I have a motion?
I would move that we approval of moving this forward to the full commission with modifications we've discussed.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Thank you. We have approved that one. Now let's move on to the next development, Shady Grove. As we look at a similar process for review of this development.
Victoria, go ahead and go ahead and speak through the financing plan for Shady Grove, please.
Okay. So for again, the record, my name is Victoria Dixon, and we are requesting approval of the financing plan for Shady Grove. If you would move to the first page of the executive summary. Shady Grove is an existing 144 unit income restricted community in Silver Spring, Maryland, or Durwood. The property was originally constructed in 1980 and renovated using LIHTC equity. And on September 1st, the commission approved the final development plan to acquire, renovate, and equip the property with improvements to energy efficiency, common areas, building exteriors, and in-unit upgrades of finishes and appliances in bathrooms and kitchens. In order to execute the development plan with the support of the committee, we are requesting the commission approve the following actions for this transaction. If you would please move forward 2 slides to 29. Approval of the financing plan as presented, totaling approximately $61.4 million. Approval of the feasibility and public purpose and allocation of up to $3,750,000 in volume cap for the transaction. Approval of the bond authorizing resolution in an amount of up to $31.5 million for the issuance and delivery of both tax-exempt private activity and taxable bonds under the indenture. Authorization to issue the financing commitment for the mortgage loan with balloon payment option. Credit enhanced by FHA risk share mortgage insurance, for which HOC would assume 25% of the risk. Approval for net sales proceeds due to the seller of approximately $18.1 million to be funded to the OHRF on an unrestricted basis. Approval for HOC to provide a bridge loan of approximately $13.6 million to bridge the receipt of LIHTC equity proceeds for repayment to be funded from the OHRF. Approval to release available cash held by the seller entity, which proceeds of the replacement reserves will be used to repay the relock, with remaining funds deposited to the OHRF. Funds of the operating cash and mortgage escrow would be together deposited to the HOC General Fund operating reserve. And finally, for the borrower to accept the proposed mortgage loan and bridge loan. A review of the transaction has been completed and has been determined to meet the needs of the community, to preserve affordable housing, provide significant public purpose, and support the allocation of available volume cap for the 4% tax credits. If you would please move forward to slide 32. The property is currently operating under an extended use covenant, which is set to expire on December 31st, 2028. Income restrictions will be preserved an additional 23 years in combination with this transaction, which in furtherance of HOC's mission, with all units set aside at or households at or below 50% of AMI and who benefit from project-based Section 8 rental assistance. If you would please move forward to the pro forma tab 34. Given the financial commitments to the properties and its operating projections, this transaction is considered feasible. Post renovation, stabilized operations are expected to be achieved by April 2024. I will correct that typo and assume an NOI of approximately 1.7 million. Based on an all-in interest rate of 3.67%, inclusion of a 50% cushion for interest rate movements, the project is projected to support a loan of approximately 28.6 million. Excluding the cushion, the transaction supports a mortgage amount of approximately 30.6 million. You'll please move to the sources and uses, next tab. Here is a summary of the sources and uses of the transaction as described. On the next slide, again, we have the volume cap outline. We have then on the next slide a summary of the bond resolution that will be presented by council. And then on the next slide, based on the current underwriting, staff projects income collection for the transaction will be approximately $225,000 lower than budgeted for the agency's fiscal year due to incorporation of a deferred developer fee, again, to realize higher LIHTC equity. The next slide, please. And then the next slide, 40. In order to execute the development plan as presented, in summary, we propose the financing plan to include the issuance of the tax-exempt private activity bonds and taxable bonds of up to 31.5 million, which will fund the 38-year FHA risk share mortgage and bond reserve under the indenture. HOC to take 25% of the mortgage risk in the transaction. Allocation of up to 30,750,000 of HOC's available tax exempt volume cap to satisfy the LIHTC 50% test. HOC to provide a bridge loan using proceeds of the OHRF with additional sources of LIHTC equity, deferred developer fee, and subordinate seller loan. The bond and initial mortgage loan closings are expected to occur in November 2021 with conversion to the permanent debt by September 2024. In conclusion, does the committee join staff's recommendation to the commission for approval of the actions as requested?
I would say back on the same issue about the fiscal budget impact. Your statement on slide 39 doesn't indicate what that amount is, and you should similarly put in language that you're going to work out with accounting. Go with Terry.
You make that change.
I don't have anything else. I would move approval.
Second.
It's been moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any other questions of staff before we vote? Hearing none. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. That is unanimously approved to recommend to the full commission at our October meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now we turn to Upton 2, which requires the approval to remove cap of 6.5 million and restore the maximum bridge loan of 12 million approved from draws on the PNC Bank real estate line of credit. Who will be presenting this?
Jay Shepard, Housing Acquisition Manager, will be presenting his video's off, but his audio is working. And for the record, Marcus Irvin, Acting Director of Development. Jay, if you're ready.
You're mute.
Okay. All right. Well, he may be having some audio troubles then. Well, the item here is Upton 2, approval to remove the cap of 6.5 million and restore the maximum bridge loan of 12 million approved from draws on the PNC real estate line of credit. Background on the Upton 2, it's a 150 unit age restricted community, which is under construction in Rockville Town Center, part of a larger master plan development entitled for 400 units with Dubois. How we've broken down here is a timeline which started with the initial construction financing for the Upton 2. It was closed in 2 distinct phases, the first of which was the tax exempt finance senior construction loan in March of 2019. And the second component, which included the LIHTC equity in November of 2019. Traditionally, all of your sources would close at the same time, just however, due to the terms of the acquisition and development agreement with the lender. With the closing of the funding lender in March of 19, this was 8 months before the LIHTC equity was in a position to close. For the senior construction loan, the commission approved this via 2 resolutions, which approved the financing plan. That included several different sources if we scroll down, just due to the nature of the project, but there was a privately placed tax exempt loan to fund the construction, which will be repaid at a future date via an FHA risk share permanent loan, of which we'll come back to the commission with the financing plan for that. There was also bridge financing during construction via the PNC line of credit. We talked about the LIHTC equity with the current syndicator, a subordinate county loan. Scroll down some more, please. And then also acquisition loan and deferred developer fees. So essentially, if we look at this table here, due to the bifurcated timeline of it and when funding was approved, back in February of 2019, we'd authorized draws of the PNC line totaling up to 12 million until such time that the LIHTC equity would have been received. This was executed back in 2019. It also included a provision that would have specified a balance of a cap of up to 6.5 million if that need was going to be reduced once we actually closed on the tax credit equity. That at the time, the 6.5 cap was deemed to be sufficient, just based on the estimates for the construction draw timing and our pay-in schedule. Despite this cap on the maximum balance, the RELOC has always carried and continues to carry a $12 million obligation. So fast forward to November of 19, by the time this closed, the difference on the term sheet and the equity pay-in schedule shows that the deal would need approximately a little more than $3 million, but once again was just delayed by the overall receipt of LIHTC equity. So just showing on the table just how the equity sources line up, the pay-in, and due to this gap, which is around 2.5 million, due to this, essentially due to this gap and the timing of it, is currently projected this maximum balance outstanding will be about 9 million. But this occurred just before stabilization and the release of the equity contribution, which will fully repay the RELOC. So to date, 6.5 cap on this maximum balance outstanding has been respected. As we've presented in the past, the construction is expected to be completed by January of 22. We have the first batch of units being slated for delivery. And stabilization expected to occur in June of 22, which at that time, once we've achieved stabilized occupancy, we'd return to the commission with the final financing plan. Scroll down some more, please. Thank you. So walking through the timeline of the initial construction financing, paying of the LIHTC equity, does the Development Finance Committee join staff's recommendation to the Commission to approve an amendment to the bridge note, thereby removing the balance cap on the bridge loan to allow up to $12 million to be drawn from the PNC line of credit until such time we're able to retire that funding in the future. If there's any questions, we'll take those from the Commission.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I guess, for my background, could you explain, I guess I was unclear why there was a $6.5 million cap on a $12 million line of credit. Was that self-imposed? And then if so, is that common to take a line of credit for a certain amount, but then limit ourselves to a lower amount of access to it?
Zach, if you want to just kind of give the historical context, but I think it was essentially goes back to the timing of the equity pay-in schedule. So at that time, the amount was expected to be lower. However, just due to the timing and receipt of those funds, we're now having to increase that. If you got any additional context?
It was self-imposed and it was unusual. So.
But the 12 million wasn't actually drawn down from the relock, right?
No, no.
Correct.
But I
It
guess,
was.
but we imposed the cap, but was that I think Jeff's question, or at least what I would get from that is, why would we impose a cap if we thought we might need 12 million?
So the idea at the time was because there was a question mark with the LIHTC to get the lender, the construction lender, fully comfortable. They basically needed a sort of outsized number sort of on the books. In constructing, so that's what the 12 million there is for, is because there was, so the reason why we wound up with a bunch more LIHTC equity in the end is because Upton 2 wound up being wound up closing in a year that was the first year it was a DDA, a difficult to develop area, for which you get a 30% basis boost. And that it happened right, the first year was the year in which the deal closed. And so obviously this closed very early in the year, so nobody was prepared to sort of accept that. They accept it verbally, but weren't necessarily ready to structure the deal with that extra $3 million in equity to come in. So at the time, there were some question marks around that and around a couple of other things at the time. Like at the time, there were, some of the complexities around the pilot language for HOC, as you might remember. There were a few things going on, and so the lender needed to see the outsized number to be comfortable. We structured it with the $6.5 million cap because that's what we thought the need was, and didn't really, we weren't really thinking. And so at the time, it seemed like it would be enough, and we ultimately knew that if the equity went up, that that was both a good news and bad news thing, where ultimately it's very good news. There's a lot more funding for HOC in the deal, but as much of the funding became backloaded, the cap became a future obstruction. So it was really about getting the construction lender comfortable, given that they were closing without the LIHTC credits having closed. And so at the end of the day, this item really should have been done back near the LIHTC closing. But as we sort of passed things out, we also understood that we weren't going to have an issue with the $6.5 million cap for some time. So yeah, that's the best explanation I can provide you.
And Zach, we needed to close on the financing because it was tied to the Duval closing of their financing with M&T. So ordinarily we would have waited for the high-tech equity to close later in the year, but we needed to match up with Duval and the financing of their piece because we're using the same lender.
Yeah, and they were, that's exactly right. And also, it was the timing of, we bought, we bought 150 units, obviously, worth of land, and so that there was a timing related to that acquisition too, because even though Duval was in phase one, it was a different equity investor that owned the overall parcel, and so it was both the timing of Duval's financial closing for their construction, but also satisfying the exit for the investor in the first phase that owned these units and ultimately sold these units to the new, the new various players.
Okay. It just seems odd to me that we would, volunteer, take out a line of credit. I can understand the need to make it outsized, but then to sort of self-impose a cap on our access to it seems a little odd to me.
Yeah, it's odd, and and I don't think it's something we'll do again. So I think your observation is correct.
Okay. Well, I move that we remove the cap.
Second.
Is there a second to the
Second.
motion? I'm sorry, Rick, did
I
you second?
Yes, I did.
All right, thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we remove the cap. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 It is removed.
No, it's recommended to go to the full
The
commission.
full commission. The committee's recommended
Right.
removal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, do we need to go and adopt the recommendation? Is there other action needed on this then?
On
On which?
Not an option. We have two more
On
items.
the Upton 2. I don't see. No, we have accomplished what we needed to do. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And from now, we move on to a discussion of permanent naming of the agency's developments. And Kareem?
So we have two items for naming. And the first one is Westside Shady Grove. And I think, Marcus, are you leading the discussion on that one? So staff has established some guidelines at the request of the commission, and the naming follows those guidelines. And so we're here to present to you the two names that we've worked on and selected for your recommendation to the full commission. So Marcus will lead the discussion, and Christina, whose team represents HOC's brand management team, will be part of this conversation as well. And we hope to get to agreement on the name. And if not, we'll go back to the drawing board. So with that, Marcus, please.
Can we discuss and have the rationale for the process you're recommending first before we tackle the names of the developments?
Sure. Christina, do you want to lead that discussion on the
Certainly, I can.
Go ahead.
So just to give a brief overview, I think previously we had naming for or permanent names for properties had gone through more of an informal process, an internal staff process, and at the prompting of commissioners who wanted to ensure that we had a consistent process and some guidelines around naming HOC properties and other facilities. Staff came up with a set of guidelines so that commissioners would be aware as to how we went through the procedures for coming up with names for HOC properties. And so on the naming of these properties, what we did was follow really a set of 4 very general principles, which are also laid out in both memorandum for the Upton as well as for Westside Shady Grove. And those 4 principles are that the name should have a strong positive image and should stand the test of time, that it should have appropriate regard to the facility's location, geography, a natural land feature, and or the history, whether it be the history of where the property stands or Montgomery County generally, that it should commemorate places, people, or events that are of continued importance to either the city, the region, the state, and or nationally, and then that it should recognize outstanding accomplishments by an individual who has done good for the community. And we should consider the quality of that contribution along with the length of service or other attributes to that individual.
Thank you.
Yep.
Can I just suggest, it seems to me if these are going to be the guidelines, you should submit them to the commission for approval.
I would agree.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with them necessarily. I'm just saying that this is a policy
Yes.
of the commission in terms of how we name properties.
Yes, and I
So
think
has this not been discussed with the commission before? I was reading this as if it were established policy.
No.
So I've had conversations with the chair, and his guidance to me was that we created guidelines rather than making formal policy, so that if changes needed to be made to them, small changes, we could do that without having to come back to the commission. And so we thought these guidelines were appropriate, and so we're operating on that basis, as opposed to creating formal policies for naming.
I think this issue, Jeffrey, came about when we were to be naming Elizabeth III, and a firm had been hired to brand that development, and the reaction of the entire DefFin committee was that the recommendation just bore no rationale and didn't seem to be an acceptable name. And we had asked and had sought commission input, since the naming, particular naming of people, is fraught with potential potential challenge.
I'm aware of the times we're living in, and
yeah, exactly. And we felt that it really should be something that the commission would be involved in. So I personally support the commission agreeing on the principles and the policy, and then the staff following that as we move with future developments. And I think we may at some point want to look at some of our development names, at least one of them that we currently have, as it's inconsistent, in my view, with our current climate. But
and I guess, Jeffrey, I would say a couple things. Historically, the process has been less than clear. I think there have been some occasions where staff has come to the commission with a proposal and the commission's approved, and I think there have been others when staff has picked the name. I mean, there just hasn't been any real consistency. And I've never seen any kind of guidelines in terms of how we arrive at it. I think that having guidelines is something that is useful and we should have. And I would disagree with the chair of the commission if it was his view that we shouldn't have it approved by the commission. I think that you can have guidelines. You can also have a fifth one that says, or something that says, if for some reason you want to pick a name that doesn't quite conform, then you go to the commission. I mean, the commission establishes guidelines. The commission can modify them and go around them. But I do think that it is something that should be guiding the naming of buildings. And from the commissioner's point of view, the name of our properties, and as you indicated, it's branding. And for us as commissioners not to be involved in that process is not correct.
So I would say that even with guidelines, we're not proposing to pick a name as staff. We're proposing that we would bring all names to the commission for discussion via a committee and to the full commission for approval. Absolutely.
That was not stated, but I mean, I'm not suggesting that you're not in, well, except that you said that the chair of the commission was not in favor of having firm guidelines.
Well, no. A formal policy, and the term policy is really where I'm making a distinction. So I would propose the guidelines being spelled out completely for the commission to weigh in on.
Right.
All I'm suggesting is that there's agreement as to the guidelines, period, and that every property that is to be named, that staff goes through its process, and that the discussion is held here in committee, as we're about to do now. And that if the committee disagrees, we go back to the drawing board. If the committee agrees to send it up to the full commission for approval, that happens, but that will be the process on every name going forward. And to Commissioner Simon's suggestion, if something is to be renamed, the same process would occur. We're not suggesting that staff does the naming at all without any commission involvement.
Then I think what you just described should be put out in sort of a recommendation to the full commission in terms of the policy we will follow, which is very good. I mean, it explains the whole thing.
yes,
The other question I guess I'd have related to that, and you should consult with counsel, is if the committee were to disagree, do committees have the ability to send it back to the staff under our current restrictions? I'm suggesting you need to consult with counsel on that.
Okay.
do you want to make a motion, Rick?
To not discuss the names at all today?
Oh, no.
No.
The motion that and I guess I don't really, if staff is agreeing to develop and put forth such a policy for consideration by the commission, then I don't think a motion is necessary. If in
Okay.
fact a motion is offered up, we'd have to send that motion to the commission,
Yep.
who would then have to tell the staff, because we can't tell us, as a committee, we can't tell the staff to do anything.
Yep.
Is that right, Asha?
So the committee makes recommendations to move items forward to the commission for full approval. So the committee could choose not to approve this and not recommend it, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't go to the full commission for their consideration.
But my
Staff.
question is, if we want staff to develop a policy for consideration by the commission,
Mhm.
how do we communicate that to the staff formally, or do we?
And is it policy or guidelines? What are we talking about? Policy or guidelines?
I'm
I think
not sure.
staff should discuss amongst themselves whether or not this is going to be a policy or guidelines and figure out the repercussions, and then come back with a recommendation.
I'm
in
not
terms
sure
of
what the difference is between policy and guidelines.
Policies are something that is approved by the commission. Guidelines are things that are created by the staff that don't go to the commission for full approval.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Well,
So alternatively, staff can always choose that if the committee, does not recommend to the full commission an action, staff could pull the item, revise it, not bring it to the commission, and then re-bring it back to the committee.
So Jackie, I think my answer to your question, we don't have a request from staff to approve the guidelines. So there's not an action to take, but we've had a discussion which suggests that staff should in fact develop some statement for consideration by the full commission. Which
Does
would-
sound like then if it goes to the full commission for approval or disapproval, then it becomes a policy rather than just guidelines.
And
Yes.
I am of the opinion that it is a policy, but I might
I
be
am
wrong.
too.
Okay.
So are you moving that the staff be asked to develop this as a policy to be brought to us for recommendation to the full commission?
Can I do that, Asha?
You can make the request, certainly. I mean, it does not mean that it has the power of the commission. It is a request of the committee.
All right, then I would move that the staff prepare a statement outlining
Practice.
practice for naming developments and or renaming developments for consideration and by the full commission.
I guess the question then, Rick, is, if it becomes policy, does it remove the flexibility that you were talking about?
Well, but I think that in the development of the thing that goes to the staff, they can submit something to the commission and we approve a policy, but the policy has an exit ramp, or it has an exception. The policy can provide for the commission taking an action that is not totally consistent with that policy, if they so choose, I think.
Is your issue that you want these guidelines approved by the full commission, or that you want the full commission to have the opportunity to have input on them and provide any feedback? I apologize for the helicopter.
I think they should be approved by the commission. I personally do.
But I think they always will be. Whether we call the statements guidelines or principle or policy, we would always, the notion here is to always bring the names and the recommendations for names to the full commission for approval. There was to be no deviation from that.
I think what Rick is saying is the difference between us approving the name and us approving the process that brings us the name.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, my motion is for them to do that memo on the practice, as the
Okay.
chair has said, and that leaves the staff the flexibility to develop this memo the way they want. And whether it's policy, guidelines, or whatever,
Okay.
then the commission will decide. And if it comes forward as a guideline not to be approved by the commission could say, sorry about that, folks, we want to approve the policy.
Okay.
So let staff think about it more as a result of this conversation that
Sure.
we've had and come forward with a recommendation.
Okay.
I'm not trying to write the stuff on the fly.
Okay. All right. That said, we have two names to consider for today.
Okay.
Shall we move forward with those?
On the slides, we need to go back to the first one.
Yes. What's that, Shady Grove?
Yeah.
Marcus?
So with that said, background on West Side Shady Grove Building D dates back to April of 19 when we entered into a joint development agreement with EYA and Bozzuto. Since that time, we had were under entitlements and designing. In December of 2019, we purchased the land from the county, formed a partnership, went through the additional financing for the project over the course of 2020, and then closed on the project in February of 2021, where we're currently under construction and framing is beginning. Similar to some of our other properties, to support the overall just marketing and branding, we engaged a firm, Hickok Cole, who also led the efforts for the Lindley and Chevy Chase for branding and repositioning. We went through two courses of sort of branding and messaging, looking at the aesthetic of the building, elements that we wanted to emphasize, both in the interiors, throughout the property, taking into account the location, sort of the renaissance of Shady Grove with the daily across the street, and just a larger master plan. From the first round, the names were a bit generic in nature, no real connection to the area or any of the design interiors that we were hoping to convey in the project as it's developed. And through the direction of the former executive director, we charged the team with coming back with a second set of names that honored outstanding individuals in society with a connection to the area. We also wanted to place an emphasis on the arts, albeit any kind of music, literary, and then essentially also an emphasis on persons of color and women of color. You can scroll down some more. Subsequently, through that process, went through additional names and ultimately decided upon the Hurston, which recognized Zora Neale Hurston, a prominent literary figure in African-American history. She'd attended Howard University, and through a couple different design boards, we thought conveyed sort of stylish and sophistication with the building. And through that was the ultimate selection. We did look at a combination of potentially the Zora, but we felt the Hurston had a strong name, was an ode to a prominent African-American figure, a woman of color, and then also just a role in the Harlem Renaissance. We felt that West Side Shady Grove itself was also an ode to that, with how much transformation went into the original project, where it was and what we've brought it to in terms of just the transformation of it. And then also, as we're going through the interiors, it will have some artistic elements just to promote creativity and the demographic that we're catering to. So essentially, this memo was making the recommendation for the Hurston as the naming for West Side Shady Grove. I guess I'll take any questions you guys may have.
I don't really have any questions. I mean, I haven't had a chance to really dig into her biography. I just kind of looked at it very quickly on Wikipedia. And she does seem like a significant individual. And, I did like her style. I agree that she was stylish, seeing some of the images. And I guess, both for if this is what we go with, I don't know what the alternatives were. So it's hard to say. I have no problem with this name. I like it. I think she's a good individual, worthy of having a building named after her. And whether it's with this one or the next one, or for both, I guess I hope that the building, in the lobby or wherever, incorporates some educational materials that, for the benefit of people entering the building, living there, and entering it to learn about these individuals and the names.
There's definitely an educational component in all of our developments. Christina can elaborate even with the Upton 2, but with Westside Shady Grove having the Up County Service Center, there is also the additional opportunity there to have collateral materials and educational pieces for our clients, but also for the new residents. So we have plenty of opportunities within the community spaces to do so.
Be good to have some of her books available too.
This points out, to me at least, the issue of problems associated with naming properties after individuals.
Yep.
And not just the stuff we're sort of dealing with in terms of the renaming of a lot of and statues and all that kind of stuff. If you take Zora Thurston and look at the population who might be living there or in the county, there are a lot of people who have never in life heard of her. And I'm not being critical at all. A lot of Black people who've never heard of her. There are a certain segment of the population that are younger who might have heard about it. And I think about what happens 20 years from now, when folks, memories are short, and I'm not sure what relevance there will be. And it's just I think a difficult thing when you start naming properties after individuals, because their stories, unless they are really tied to something significant in the community, don't seem to really resonate. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. I'm just saying that just points out, I think, some of the issues that we've got to face when thinking about naming them after individuals.
I don't disagree with that, Rick. Though it is, it's obviously safer to name things after a place or a thing rather than an individual, because who knows what will someday turn up in their background, or someday, I think about the things that, my daughter gives me a hard time when I get, pronouns wrong or something like that. And so there will be changing views of individuals as well, as society progresses. I still think it can be worthwhile, and especially with the educational component. I live on a street. I've always been curious, like, who is my street named after? It's a name, but I have no idea, and I have no way of finding out. I wish I did. I may not like the individual. I don't know if I found out more.
I'm sorry.
but that's why I think like combined with the educational component, it can be, something worthwhile.
I think if I'm correct, that the Park and Planning Commission names streets. They have a process for doing that. I'd be curious what that process is, and whether I know in several subdivisions that I've worked with, the names that the builder suggested were vetoed by the planning commission and others suggested. I would love to understand what their process is. And I do have concern also about naming for people. The commission in the past has named Alexander House, for instance, for a former chair. Elizabeth Square for a former chair and the instigator of the county's fair housing laws. So we have even named for persons that were living at the time, and I question whether that is a safe thing to do or an appropriate thing to do. It's tough, and I think this is why
I shouldn't look forward to the Jeffrey in my lifetime.
It's coming.
I figured I'd have to wait for the Jackie. Anyway, it is a challenge, and it's not something that I think we ought to we don't take it lightly, and I think that's important. I don't know what to do in this case.
Can I ask a question, Kayleen, or maybe Jackie, you remember? What did we do in Elizabeth House or Alexander House to explain the history of the name?
I don't think the history of the names was explained in either place.
And for Alexander
It was
House,
just named.
so well, I'm not Alexander
there a-
House.
I don't think there's anything.
I don't
There's nothing
remember.
there. There's nothing there explaining the name actually. Elizabeth House. Nothing.
But I think that
Yeah,
Jeffrey's point is absolutely valid. If we get to the point of naming, just for the sake of those who have no clue and those who come later, there needs to be something that really gives some context for
Yes.
it. And I was just trying to think
Yeah.
whether or not we had done that in.
No, I don't believe so. Alexander was Alex Green, and the former mayor of Rockville, and the first chair for quite a while.
Yeah, I think, also, to Rick, to your point earlier about, names not resonating with younger folks. I mean, I think that's where the value of a name could be, is that with that educational component, like that we are, the history, either, of, of a people, of an area, of some is not lost, right? And that, I think that's where the value can be, but it does have to be combined with that educational component, because otherwise, nobody's going to know what the Hurston is.
Right.
Well, what are your wishes?
I'm comfortable with the name. I mean, unless Rick and Jackie, you feel that we need more discussion about the process first.
my view would be, I would support sending it to the commission. I'm not necessarily saying I support or don't support the name. I think it's something that the commission should decide. And you've got a rationale for it. And if the commission, the majority of the commissioners support it, then that's what the name will be. I hate to say it, I'm somewhat ambivalent on it because I've got feelings both ways on this particular one. I probably would not oppose it. I don't think I would oppose it. But that's my feeling. So
Could we, by unanimous consent, forward it to the commission? Just agree to do that?
oh yeah, we've sent stuff to the commission without recommendations before. I mean, all of our committees have done that.
Well, why don't we do that then, since we have not had the
Okay.
discussion? The full commission may want to weigh in on the guidelines or the practice as well. And rather than delay this further.
I agree with you. Okay, I'm for that.
Can I also just ask, is it appropriate, for us to know or to be presented with different options earlier in the process, or to be involved at that level, or is that going to get us too involved in micromanaging? Or I'm like I said, I'm comfortable with the name. I just have no idea what the alternatives that were considered were.
Well, Kayleen's smiling, but
Only
we had a
because,
little bit of that with the Lindley. You came,
yes,
and I know it might have been painful for the
it was a
staff.
nightmare. No, it was more than painful. It was a nightmare, only because it was really, really hard and took so much of your time, and we want to save you from that, actually.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you.
But the other thing is, and I heard whoever was giving this description, that the former director evidently determined that it should be named after a person, a female, and a person of color. That's fairly narrow in view of our guidelines. And is that something that, if you're going to do that, is that something you should discuss? I'm not clear why and how it was limited to just that.
Okay. So I think as we develop the guidelines, that's a point of discussion, and we can expand on that.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Okay. So I would move that we forward this to the commission with no recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And now we move on to the naming of the Upton 2.
Okay. Who's taking this one? Is Jay on, or Marcus, are you doing this one as well? Or Zach?
I think Christina and LPA had sort of led the efforts in corralling us around a name.
Okay, Christina.
Certainly. So Upton 2, just by way of brief summary and background, following similar guidelines as were followed with the Hurston, we did an internal staff work session to come up with and choose an appropriate set of names and then narrow it down. The focus of the original batch of names chosen was around history, Montgomery County history in particular. And in narrowing down those names, we came to the selection of the name 10 Gibson, One of the sort of avenues we went down was focusing on Black history in Montgomery County. And so 10 Gibson stands as an homage to Robert and Sarah Gibson, who were founders of the Gibson Grove community in Cabin John. They played a critical role in establishing a free African-American community in Montgomery County after the Civil War. They organized the first Black school in the district, established a benevolent society, and the Gibson Grove AME Zion Church. And so in the early part of the 20th century, the original stretch of homes that were in this Gibson Grove area were called number 10 because there were 10 houses there. And so the shorthand became just number 10. And so that's where 10 Gibson came from. And so the name 10 Gibson recognizes the significant community contributions that the Gibsons made to Montgomery County, and it draws upon that historical number 10 reference to that community in particular. And as always, as we look at our work through the lens of race, equity, and inclusion, one of the things that we did want to focus on was ensuring that we are focusing on the significant contributions of Black communities and other communities of color, and uplifting the work that those folks have done. And so that was another consideration for honoring the Gibsons with this name.
Are we sure that there is nothing else or no other development named the Gibson, or because I think that's the other issue that we have to be careful that we're not setting up a duplicate name. Again, maybe the planning board checking against any of their lists could be useful. But other than that, I like it, frankly. Other than that, it's a different geography in the county than where the Upton is, and in the heart of Rockville. So that's my only concern there.
Certainly, Commissioner, and I will tell you in the other historical consideration names that we considered, we did look both geographically related to where the Upton 2 stands now, and then as well as at the broader Montgomery County community. And so we felt that the weight given to these individuals and their contributions to Montgomery County outweighed perhaps some of the benefits of the other names that were more geographically proximate to Upton 2. I'll also note that staff did do work to ensure, did research to ensure that there is not another existing 10 Gibson in particular. Obviously, I know Gibson could be a pretty ubiquitous name, but there is not another multifamily property that has this specific name, and certainly not anywhere where it would cause market confusion.
Okay.
I guess that this feels a little awkward. I just sort of Googled both of those names, and they're already both up. Bizzuto is listing the Hurston. I don't know if these are their main websites or what, but both the Hurston and 10 Gibson are there are websites for them. Edgewood Management, we're excited to see 10 Gibson's construction progress. This is from June.
It's not a simple process.
Well,
But I guess my question is, have these already been named?
and the answer is obviously yes.
So, so we've had some miscommunication on the naming, and so while the names have been used in some form, they've not been officially approved by the commission. So we've asked our partners and others to discontinue the use of the names, but they've not been officially approved by the commission. And we acknowledge that.
Did anybody raise the question about, one of the things that strikes me about 10 Gibson is I live at 10 Gibson, which is 223 First Street or whatever the real, I mean, one would think when you hear 10 Gibson that it's on Gibson Street. I'm sorry to say that, but.
And there is a Gibson court in the county.
It just seems a little bit odd. I mean, that Gibson, I understand. That's the confusion I have with 10 Gibson. It just doesn't seem to fit on a building, because normally if there's a number associated with a building, you think it's the number, the address of
Street
that
number.
particular building. And I won't comment on Jeff's question about whether it has been named or not. I think, well, never mind. And the other question, I guess is, I understand it's hard always to find something geographic related to the specific site or the immediate environment, but Cabin John and Rockville are two different places.
Yeah.
And I just don't quite understand that. Anyway. Again, my position, I mean, my position would be, I'd support sending it for consideration by the commission. I'm not sure on this one at all, but.
Jeffrey, what's your
I-
reaction?
I support that as well. I guess I will admit, I feel a little disappointed that, it does appear that, these names are out there publicly before we've approved them.
That's because it wasn't intended that we approve them.
So, but otherwise, yeah, I don't know if that was a motion, Rick, but I would also support moving it to the full commission for consideration.
Without recommendation.
Yes.
All right.
That was a motion.
And we're doing that by consensus.
Okay.
So I would expect this will generate some conversation at the commission meeting, as it should.
Okay.
And, I guess, Karine, the only thing I'd say to staff, and you indicated the painful process for the Lindley. The fact is, these names are long lasting.
Mhm.
They are significant to the branding of HOC properties and HOC. And if it's painful, it's painful, but we need to give real consideration to all the different options and
Sure.
come up with something that folks are really happy with and that reflects the kinds of things we want reflected. So
And so
sometimes you got to endure pain.
So we'll build all of that into the guidelines as we develop them. I would just say we were operating with a set of instructions, and we will relook at the entire process again and revise and put them forth.
Okay.
I understand that, Karine. It's just, if we really are approving them, if part of that process is the commission approving them, then, the commission should approve them before they're out there publicly.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey, I will repeat, that's why it's before us now. because it was
Yes.
it was discovered accidentally that in fact they had been informally named, and a question was raised about when they were going to be presented to the commission. And I won't say anymore.
Okay.
So, but I think the policy that Kayleen is, or the staff is going to prepare for us, or whatever it's called, the practice, is going to clarify this for the future.
The future. Yeah. All right.
All right. Those are it for today.
There, Corinne, you had mentioned that we have been offered some additional units. In the village. And so we look forward to understanding the MPDU selection process and how decisions are made, and understanding that there are very significant decisions are made outside of our agency, and we are left with making choices as best we can within the choices that are available to us. And so I'm looking forward to, on a future committee agenda, we having a discussion of the processes that are being used to make the recommendations that no longer necessarily committee decisions again, but are items that need to go to the full commission. And hopefully that conversation can be developed in the very near future. And before many more decisions have to be made of that nature. Also recognizing that this particular community is an anomaly in the choices that we were offered.
We hope.
And I'm sorry?
We hope it's an anomaly.
Well, I've been told it is, and I am looking into it a little further, but I'm looking forward to the commission being much more aggressive in leading a community conversation in the whole principle of scatterization and full integration rather than isolation within communities. And so hopefully we can have that conversation and have the opportunity to make the best decision we can make within the choices we have available, but begin to impact the decisions made by others, both CDA and there may be some legislative work that we need to be doing to strengthen the MPDU law and the concept of full inclusion of the MPDUs within a community. So look forward to that conversation.
And the decision on these two has to be made in what, 10 days? I forgot what the time frame is.
I think it's 21 days.
Oh, 21 days.
For that initial indication of interest. So we
Okay.
still do have some time. And I think there are only 2 units in this offering. And if we're selecting, we would suggest one on the end and one somewhere in the middle. So we'll provide information on that. shortly.
Well, I'd particularly like to know where they are in relation to the
Right.
eight
the
that we've
previous-
chosen. And clearly, we do not have the information available to determine how scattered they can possibly be.
How scattered across the development?
Yes. We need to be, in my opinion, we need to be looking at the entire development and seeing how the units are grouped or clumped in isolation geographically.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
it
we do
just
have
troubles
some-
me to see them at the end of a cul-de-sac off by themselves someplace.
Mhm.
And if that's getting through the process at CDA, I think we
DHCA.
need to talk to
DHCA.
CDA.
DHCA.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, DHCA.
Mhm.
We need to be having conversations with them, and I would like the committee's input on that. But having been an original advocate of MPDUs, and probably having sold hundreds of them in my career, I really feel strongly about the program, and I think it can fall short of the goal and the legislative intent. And so I think if we can make improvements on that, it would be great. And I would love to see us divert some energy into seeing how we can undertake that.
Yeah, and
I have written to the director of DHCA not as a commissioner, but as a private citizen in Montgomery County and the former director of DHCA, to in fact reinforce that the legislation requires dispersal throughout communities, and have gotten some response that I'm not totally satisfied with. And I think we should follow up. But on your point, Jackie, unless I'm incorrect, DHCA has already approved a MPDU plan, so they should have in hand a map of the entire development
They
with
should.
the location of MPDUs in the future. So there should be a snapshot of what is being planned in terms of that. And when I say that I'm hopeful that this is an anomaly, I understand that it's an anomaly as far as stuff that has been approved, but it happened. And what we need to try to do is to ensure that in future submissions to DHCA, this doesn't happen, particularly when you have developments that might take advantage of additional MPDUs to get additional density. So that this could very well come up again. And I think it's an important point to raise, and it's not just with home ownership, but it's with rental. And I mean, it's a subject that has been discussed for forever. Anyway.
Well, I just had occasion professionally to assist a transaction and look at a property in Rockville City that is just an outstanding example of what it should be. There are one-car townhomes in a row of two-car townhomes, and they're scattered throughout the various sticks in the development, and they're not conspicuous. You don't drive down a long driveway of nothing and find a pocket of MPDUs. And I had hoped that we had come way past that concept long ago, and was really disappointed to see what was affected here in Montgomery Village at Bloom, but maybe we can have an impact on the future development and the opportunity for true inclusion and scatterization. Anything else anyone wishes to put on the table? Hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much.
All right,
We'll
have a good
see you
weekend.
all soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.